Good morning, brothers and sisters. Proverbs 24, verse 1 says, "Do not be envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them. For their heart devises violence, and their lips talk of troublemaking." Today I want to read a portion of Luke chapter 12 and verses 13 through 21. Quote, "Then one from the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me.' But he said to him, 'Man, who made me a judge or an arbiter over you?' And he said to them, 'Take heed and beware of covetousness or greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses.' Then he spoke a parable to them, saying, 'The ground of a rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, What shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater. There I will store up my crops and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid out for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God." Now this man in the parable saw himself as the owner of all that he had. Do you notice the prominence of the first person pronoun in his speech? 6 times he says I, without any regard for God. He refers to my crops, my barns, my grain, my goods, and, most frighteningly of all, my soul. He would have been in harmony with the proud and defiant words of William Henley's Invictus, quote, "I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." The Bible declares the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, the world and all those who dwell in it, Psalm 24, verse 1. God rightfully owns the whole works. If he lets us use any of it, he still remains the owner and we will give an account to him of how we used it as his stewards. Our lives are not our own. We have been bought with a price. We belong to the Lord. If he has given you intelligence, he will demand an account of how you used it for his purpose. If he entrusts material goods and money to you, someday you will answer for how you invested in light of eternity. The greedy man is proud. If you ask this man, how do you get all this wealth? He would have answered, I got it all by hard work, using my head, and I had a little luck with the weather. But he wouldn't have acknowledged God's grace as the source of it. The greedy man is self-sufficient. His confidence was in his many barns full of produce, not in God's care. The greedy man is his own Lord. He asks himself, What shall I do? He proudly declares, This is what I will do. He does not ask, Lord, what would you have me to do? Now you don't have to read between the lines to see that this man and his brother were not best buddies at this point. The money had come between them. How many families have been divided over the settling of the family estate? How many brothers and sisters are angry that they won't speak to each other because they're at war over possessions or money that belong to their parents? In this case, I presume that the man bringing the complaint had some justification for his case. His brother probably had wronged him, but Jesus confronted this man with his own greed. The Bible is clear that the number one priority is to love God, and that number 2 is to love our neighbor as much as we love ourselves. Our love of money and the things is just a manifestation of our love of self, more than our love of God and our neighbor. The rich man made a deliberate, thought-out decision, but he left out one critical factor: eternity. He had his bases covered for many years on earth, but not for eternity in heaven. Alexander McLaren puts it, quote, "The goods may last, but will he?" Of course, he had no guarantee that even the goods would last. His barns would have been hit, or could have been hit, by lightning and burned to the ground before morning. Thieves or invading armies could have taken it all from him. Rats could have eaten and polluted his storehouses. Nothing in this life is guaranteed except death and perhaps taxes. The rich man thought that he was being prudent. He had thought matters through carefully. But God bluntly calls him a fool. The fool thinks about life, but he doesn't include God, judgment, and eternity in his thoughts. So at death, the fool and his riches are parted for all eternity. God's voice breaks into this man's life like a thunderclap without warning. Quote, "Front and center before my throne, give an account of how you have used what I have graciously entrusted to you." The rich fool was weighed in the balance and found wanting. Two men were at the funeral of a wealthy man. The first man whispered to the second, "How much did he leave?" The second man replied, "He left it all." We always do, of course, so each of us has a choice to make about how we invest the rest of our lives. Will I serve God or will I serve greed? The world says that life consists of things, but God says that life consists of being rightly related to Him and to others. The world would view this rich man as a success. He would be featured in business magazines as a model to follow. He had not gained his wealth by dishonest or corrupt means. He had worked for it, poured his money back into the business, and had done well. He was financially secure. He could now enjoy the good life, good food, fine wine, servants, and whatever pleasures money could afford. Isn't that what we all aim for in life? Isn't that why we go to college? So that we can get a good career, make plenty of money, provide the finer things in life for our children, and retire someday with plenty in our investments? What's wrong with that? Well, William Barclay points out that this man's whole attitude was the very reverse of Christianity. Instead of denying himself, he aggressively affirmed himself. Instead of finding his happiness in giving, he tried to conserve it by keeping. His goal was to enjoy life, but in seeking his life, he lost it. What's wrong with this man's focus? He had the world's perspective, not God's perspective. God's perspective is not that riches are inherently wrong. Money can be a great good if it is used in line with God's perspective. There are several wealthy men in the Bible, such as Job, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and Joseph, who enjoyed God's blessing and were godly men. But to a man, they were generous men who lived in light of eternity. As Paul tells Timothy, quote, "Instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited or to fix their hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed." So if you want to be rich toward God, we need to be careful to distinguish between the world's perspective and God's perspective. We are bombarded daily with the world's perspective, which invariably is focused on this life. God's perspective always takes into account the life to come. To be really rich, Jesus says that we must be rich toward God by laying up treasure in heaven. We should think of ourselves standing before God, giving an account of what He has entrusted to us. Will we be really rich on that day? At the end of the movie Schindler's List, the war is over and Mr. Schindler is leaving the many Jews whom he saved by employing them in his munitions factory. He has spent his entire personal fortune to bribe German officials in order to save these people from the death chambers. But as he looks at them, he breaks down weeping and laments, "I could have done more." They try to console him, but he points to his nice car and says, "I could have sold it and saved a few more lives." He pulls out an expensive fountain pen and a watch and says, "These could have been sold to save another life." Schindler was not a Christian, and he was not saving souls for eternity. Perhaps this man was a bit too compulsive about his mission. But still, when we think about our Savior's commission to preach the gospel to every creature, we all need to ask ourselves, am I doing enough? Am I laying up treasure for myself?